Previously on Cooking with Ted.
Because I'm going to be doing a video in the future where I make 2 loaves of bread. One with a standard gold all-purpose flour, bleached, bromated. You can find it at any supermarket. And the other with a high-quality, locally milled flour. We're going to do a taste test. We'll see if there's any noticeable difference. I'm going to guess there probably is. But we're going to find out for sure. We're going to find out for sure. We're going to find out for sure. What's going on, YouTube? I made a promise in a previous video that I would be doing an experiment where I make 2 loaves of bread, one with each different type of flour, and I'm back to show you what I did. So this is actually an honest science experiment that I did. I haven't done an actual science experiment since I was in school, so I had to sort of rewind my brain and just be like, wait, what is the scientific method? How do I do this? What factors do I need to consider to make sure the results are as consistent as they could be? But before we get into the great bread experiment, I need to show you how to make a starter. Now, a starter is basically just a house for natural yeast to live in. Now, what we're going to do also is train the yeast to be able to do what we want, because if we just let it sit in there, it wouldn't really smell very good. It wouldn't really be what we were looking for as far as for baking. So the first step, grab your jar, mix equal parts flour and water, put a cloth or a paper towel over it, and let it sit on your windowsill for about 24 to 48 hours. Now, I use a jar because it allows me to see through the side, and once you start seeing some bubbles through there, then discard half of it. Some of the water may have separated at the top. That's fine. Take a spoon, scoop out half, replace what you took out with flour and filtered water. Now, I say filtered water because there is a lot of chlorine in tap water, and that can inhibit the environment for the yeast. You're going to continue this process of doing this every day. Just check it in the morning, scoop out half, replace with flour and water, and give it a little sniff every day. It's going to smell pretty sharp, pretty bad, but as long as you keep scooping it out, replacing it with flour and the filtered water, and giving it a sniff each time, it will actually start to smell more like bread or more like yeasty sourdough situation. Keep feeding it and keep smelling it until it smells like something you would want to put in your mouth instead of something that you'd want to put in your car. And once it gets to that smell, that means that the starter's about ready to work with. Now, we're not just going to put this directly into a dough. We still need to cultivate this from then on, but this is just how you make a starter. So now you have a starter. Yay! Now, to care for your starter, some people actually feed it every day. I think that's great if you're going to be baking very often. Unfortunately, I don't bake that often, especially in the summertime when it's really, really hot. I'm like, I don't want to bake a loaf of bread. I don't want a 500-degree oven when it's 100 degrees outside. It's just not, I just don't want that. What I do is I put it in a tight lid container and leave it in the fridge. When I'm ready to bake, or if I know I'm going to be baking in a few days, I'll take it out of the fridge, scoop off any parts that have dried or look kind of off, and then I'll move it to a new container. I'll discard a little bit every 24 hours, replace it with flour and water. Do that for a couple of days and keep smelling it periodically. Now, some people may think I'm a monster for not feeding my starter every day. And you know what? Let's get to the science experiment. The question here is, does the quality of flour used affect the final result in baking? Now, for this, I'm going to give it 3 factors: look, taste, and crumb, I guess. I don't know. Basically, how it looks and tastes. It's 2 factors. It's not 3 factors. I'm just going to do 2 factors. So to give myself the most consistent results, what I did is I took a little bit of my starter and put it into 2 separate jars and then proceeded to feed those with the flour I was going to use to bake those final loaves. I basically just did this just to make sure that I was as consistent as possible with this experiment. So the regular starters in the plain jar and the other starter, the starter with the more high-end freshly milled flour, is in my Luxardo cherry jar. I bought a jar of Luxardo cherries about a year ago, and it was $20. But those cherries are really, really good. But they're $20. Sometimes I just treat myself to fancy cherries because, you know what? I'm worth it. So I fed the starters for a few days. I did it about 3 or 4 days just to make sure that they were getting going and ready to go. And now I was ready to mix the dough. So first off, I need to make what's called a sponge or a leaven. I measured out 32 grams of starter in each bowl, in 2 separate bowls. I used that same scale that I used in the past. Great to see you again. This scale sucks! I then added 100 grams of each flour to those bowls and 100 grams of water to those bowls. Mix it up and let it sit overnight. Now the next morning, I had to go to work at my day job, so I had to get up early to get this process going. Unfortunately, YouTube doesn't pay the bills. Like and subscribe. Both of them are looking pretty bubbly. They're ready to go. It was also 6 a.m. and here's a bonus photo of what I look like first thing in the morning. So for this, I'm going to use a 75% hydration. Now, what does that mean? Great question. So a baker's percentage is a term that you might hear bandied about a bunch. And what it basically means is that for every 1,000 grams of flour, however much water is in there compared to the 1,000 grams of flour, that is where you get that percentage. So for example, this, I'm using a 75% hydration. That means that for every 1,000 grams of flour, I'm going to use 750 grams of water. So here's my recipe. 500 grams of flour, I'm using 450 grams of the whichever flour I'm using, and then I'm also adding 50 grams of white whole wheat flour. I just do that because I like a little darker loaf, and I also want to give it a little slightly more nutrition. Then I'm using 125 grams of the leaven, 375 grams of water, and 10 grams of salt. So you're going to start off by taking your bowl and putting in your 375 grams of water. Now put in 125 grams of leaven. This is where a scale is very important. The scale, I know I give it a hard time, but it's kind of like this old cat that I have in my house that we have like a respect for one another, but there was definitely a rocky start to get to that point. Putting your water in first, now you're going to put in your 125 grams of leaven. You're going to mix it around. I used my hand here. It's fine. You want to just mix it around until it's dispersed. This is also a great way to make sure that it's passing what's called the float test. Add your flour, add your salt, and mix it up. This first loaf, I mixed with my hand, and then my hand got covered in dough. So I then washed my hands, and then mixed the second loaf, the same process, only I used a spatula this time. So it really took me no time at all to just throw that consistency right out the window. Oh well, I'm not a scientist. So now we're going to let both doughs rest for about 30 minutes. This process is called the auto-lees, as you may hear, or maybe auto-lies. I don't know, I've never actually heard the word pronounced, so it might be either of those.
Auto-lies.
But you're going to let it sit for about half an hour. This is going to allow the water and the flour to fully incorporate, and it will also allow some gluten strands to start forming so that it will be a little more billowy and stretchier. You don't want to just like mix it and just go on to the next step. You want to give it time to rest. That's the thing I love about baking, is that it requires like 5 to 10 minutes of work and then time to just like chill and do other stuff. I'm inherently lazy, okay? That's why I like to do this. Most of the time you want to knead your dough, but for this I had to go to work, so I didn't have time to actually knead it. So instead I just stretched it, flipped it over, put plastic on top, and then put it in the fridge. The reason I'm putting them in the fridge is just to slow their rise. All right, so it's 12 hours later, and I'm back from the textile mill. I work in the 1910s. I go back in time to go to work, and I work 12-hour shifts for $1 a day. We're going to turn out our doughs onto a clean work surface and form them into little circles. Dust them with flour and put a towel over them. Now we're going to wait another half hour or so and come back to the kitchen, and now we're going to actually fully shape them. Now, shaping loaves is not something that I feel super great about my skills. I'm not very good at shaping loaves. The process here is really just to ensure that you get some like nice big bubbles forming on the inside of your loaves. So what I did is I flipped these loaves over, stretched it out into a big circle, and then you just kind of want to like pull the bottom and stretch it and kind of fold it up over the top. You're kind of like you're folding an envelope, or you're making an envelope from scratch, I guess, if anybody's done that in the last 200 years. You fold it up, pull out the right wing, fold that over, left wing, fold that over, and then you take the top, stretch that out, and fold it over to the bottom. Now, what you're trying to do here is form a seam. You're trying to like take the dough and like form it into a seam, and then make it so that the outside looks stretched out like a nice crust, or however this looks. Like, you just want to stretch it out, form it into a ball. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fine. Let's try the other one. Maybe the next one will be better. We'll do the same process, bottom, right, left, stretch at the top, flip it over, and then what we'll do for this one instead is we'll actually like drag it across the counter to try to form the seam that way. That also works. So much for consistency again, folks. So I got these baskets. These work. I've also used pots and or a large bowl. You can do that as well. You basically just put a towel in there, dust it with some flour. I'm using rice flour here just because it's less glutinous. So we'll actually like make sure that the dough doesn't like stick to the cloth. You want to avoid that at all cloths. So basically you're just going to dust the flour over the loaf, cover it, and let it sit for about an hour or two. So let it sit at room temperature for about an hour or two. Remember, we took these loaves out of the fridge, so they might still have some chill on them. We want to make sure that they come to at least room temperature before we start baking. All right, so the other tool I'm using here that you're going to need for bread are these Lodge cast iron Dutch ovens with tight-fitting lids. Now, these are vital for getting a really crisp and shiny crust on your loaves. So what I do is I'll put both of them in the oven to preheat at 475, and you want them to get nice and hot. So this is another step where you want to be careful. Make sure that you have some good oven mitts, or at the very least, double up whatever dish towel you're using. And we want to let these pots preheat in the oven for 20 minutes. So what I mean by that is the oven's going to preheat. Once the oven's preheated, let it sit for another 20 minutes once you're getting close to baking time. And keep an eye on the loaves too. They'll start to poof up. So what I'll do is I'll sort of like just move them around just a little bit just to make sure that they're not sticking to the sides. You want to be really gentle because the dough is still really billowy and you don't want to break any bubbles that are forming inside the bread. So now we're going to put the loaves into these pots very carefully because these pots are very hot. We're going to take a knife or a razor blade, as I do here, and we're going to create a scoring pattern. Now, the shallower the angle you do here, the more that the leaf will kind of like fold up and give you a nice like little charred edge on the side. It looks pretty. What I did is I just cut straight down. The reason we're scoring is just to give the crust sections to expand. Otherwise, it'll crack on the sides and that'll look weird. Some people do beautiful, beautiful patterns on top of loaves. I'm just kind of like, let's just cut it and see how it goes kind of guy. Put the lids on the pots. This is important because of the water inside the loaves. It's going to actually steam the loaves inside your Dutch oven. A lot of professional ovens have professional steam injectors. Those are very expensive, and that's not the kind of oven I'm working with here, okay? We all know that this oven doesn't look like it has that capability. This oven sucks! So by using the Dutch oven, it actually allows the dough to steam itself as it's cooking inside an already preheated oven. So bake it for about 20 to 25 minutes. After that time, you're going to open the oven, take the lids off, and close the oven again. Make sure you do that rather quickly because you don't want to lose a lot of heat in the oven. Bake it for about another 20 minutes, and now check the loaves. They should be nice and golden brown and ready to take out of the oven. And using an oven mitt or a towel, I'm going to gently lift them out and place them on a cooling rack. Now, I know it's tempting to just cut right into these loaves and just start eating, but there's still a lot of steam in there, and you want to make sure that they cool enough so that the structure of the crumb actually is maintained. And for this recipe, and for this experiment, I decided to wait. But the other thing I really like about baking is when you pull the loaves out of the oven, it's just like listening to the crackling. It's very soothing. It's a very like calming sound. But here's the other thing. There are very few joys greater than cutting open a freshly baked loaf of bread and smearing some really good butter on there. Woo! That's one of my favorite bites. So here's the deal. I'd say let them rest for an hour. I did. If you don't want to, live your truth. Go to town. Cut it open, slather some butter on there, have yourself a little party. Okay, now we also have to take one look at here because I've baked a lot of loaves, but very few have looked as good as these. Look at these cross sections. This looks so good. I am very proud of myself for these. But the other thing you're going to notice is that there's not a lot of difference between the crumb on both of these. There's also not a lot of difference with the external. If anything, the only difference from these two is the fact that there were two different variations in the preparation method, specifically with the shaping. Hey guys, it's me in the editing bay. Upon further inspection, it does look like there's a significant difference in the color and also the spacing of the bubbles in the crumbs. So just wanted to let you know there is a difference that you can tell. Hope you're enjoying the video. In summation, it does look like the fancier freshly milled flour did form a prettier loaf, but I would chalk that up to the shaping technique instead of the actual flour used. And when I tasted them, I tried to just taste them without any butter. They tasted pretty similar, I'm not gonna lie. And I don't know if this is because I did use a natural leaven. There was some layer of flavor to the freshly milled flour that was a little sweeter and almost a little more layered, but it was very subtle, and I almost like didn't fully taste the difference initially. The gold medal flour still tasted really good, but there was definitely something not as layered as the other one. So the difference is there, but it was very slight. But I also think that there is more data to be collected here. So I might actually try this again in the future, but I might actually do something really crazy and actually go and buy whole wheat berries and grind them myself and make flour that way, and then compare that with the gold medal flour or even like King Arthur flour or something. That's not going to happen for a minute. I'm going to need a lot of equipment and a lot of preparation for that, but stay tuned for that because I think that that might actually be the next step in this journey. So folks, that's this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I sort of wanted to do a couple things with this video where I show you how to make a starter and I show you through my process of making bread while also seeing if we can answer like a scientific experiment question. If you're interested in this or if you have any insight into the whole baking game, I would love to read your comments or I'd love to get an email if you want to send me an email and tell me what you think. The email address is posted here on my page. Or if you just want to leave a comment about how much you also like bread and butter. It sounds really basic, but wow, what a great thing. So that's it. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I hope this bread experiment educated you or at least entertained you. Folks, this has been Cooking with Ted. Thanks so much for watching. Bye! Like and subscribe.